Welcome to the Pancake Podcast, the show that takes you on a journey through the layers of life's challenges, all the while savoring the simple pleasure of a perfectly cooked pancake. Your host, Jason Grissom, invites you to join him as he explores the complexities of our world, drawing inspiration from the undeniable truth that there are difficulties in everything except in eating pancakes. In each episode, we'll delve into thought-provoking conversations, stories of triumph over adversity, and expert insights that provide a fresh perspective on the hurdles we face. Just like flipping that pancake to achieve that perfect golden brown, we'll flip our perspectives on life's challenges, aiming to uncover the sweetness hidden within. From resilience to success, from moments of doubt to moments of clarity, we'll uncover the parallels between conquering life's obstacles and savoring the simplest joys. Together, we'll navigate the intricate flavors of our lives, always with a side of optimism and a sprinkle of inspiration. So, if you're hungry for thought-provoking discussions, if you're craving the motivation to tackle challenges head-on, and if you're ready to find joy in the midst of life's complexities, then this is the podcast for you. Get ready to indulge in insightful conversations, topped with a dash of wisdom and a generous serving of encouragement. This is the Pancake Podcast, and we can't wait to dive into the layers of life with you, one pancake and one challenge at a time. So grab your fork and your headphones, because the journey begins now. Let's flip the script on life's challenges and savor the delicious simplicity together, right here on the Pancake Podcast.
All right. So welcome to episode 2 of the Pancake Podcast. Again, I'm your host, Jason Grissom. Excited to have Blake Timms, or actually Dr. Blake Timms, on with us today. He did not pay me to say that. I just like to say that to people who have completed the amount of schooling that Blake has in order to obtain that designation. I've actually known Blake for about 20 years, knew him all the way back when he was a teenager. He was involved, as well as his dad, in a student ministry at a church that I was leading. And so let me just give you a quick rundown of Blake. I know, again, he's probably going to be embarrassed by this, but I want to let you know kind of where he's coming from on the academic side. He is a graduate of the University of South Alabama, Go Jags, where he has a Bachelor's of Arts concentrating in human services with disciplines in health science, psychology, and sociology. He also holds a Master of Arts from the University of Mobile in marriage and family counseling. He is a graduate of Vanderbilt University, Go Doors. And they may not be known for their football, but they're definitely known for their baseball. I don't think Blake missed many baseball games either from his social media feed when he was there. But he has a Master's of Theology Studies with an individualized focus on pastoral theology, religion, gender, sexuality, and the integration of theology and psychology in pastoral care. And no, I cannot say that all again. And then finally, he received his PhD from the University of Louisiana Monroe in marriage and family therapy, and recently also received a graduate certificate in autism studies at the University of Memphis, which is where Blake currently resides as the assistant athletic director, with a focus on mental health and sports performance. So that's a little bit of background on Blake from the academic side. Again, my history with Blake dates all the way back to his teenage years. So Blake, what I'd like for you to do first, before we dive into some other topics concerning mental health, tell us a little bit about your growing up. And one of the things that I really remember that was significant in your childhood growing up was some pretty serious back surgeries that you had during that time. And can you tell our audience, since we deal with how do you deal with the difficulties in life, maybe how that shaped you to become the person you are today, and did that have any impact on what you do today?
For sure. Um, yeah, it definitely had an impact. I think the biggest thing, like looking back on it, the biggest thing that I took away from, you know, being a teenager and having to have, I think it was 4 or 5 spine surgeries, over those years is having to embrace the unknown. And as a kid, I didn't know what it was, but obviously looking back on it, I know that I had anxiety as a kid. And if you know anything about anxiety at all, that's the unknown is terrible. It's like a trying to know, like, the plan and what's going to happen and all of that. And none of my surgeries were ever guaranteed, and there was no like promise that they would work and that, I wouldn't have to have another one. And I just wanted to go to high school and be a normal kid, So I mean, that was a big impact growing up. And of course it also came with residual effects like bullying and, like that kind of stuff from like appearance. But looking back on it, it definitely shaped kind of who I am, in like in the sense of like as a Christian, like my ability to rely on God. I think it really strengthened that, and also to embrace the unknown. It really, really shaped that. Um, I'm not saying that it's always easy, now, but it did kind of give me a platform for doing so. Um, and I think it really gave me a professional lens to kind of help people dealing with struggles, whether it's for medical reasons, for mental health reasons, for emotional reasons, spiritual reasons, whatever it is. It kind of gave me a reason and like a why, as far as why I want to help people, because I've kind of been there myself.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I know in being in pastoral ministry for over 30 years, when people go through difficulties, especially it seems like on the physical side, whether it's a long-term fight against cancer or some type of long-term uh, chronic pain.
Hmm.
I often get that question, why is this happening to me? Why am I having to go through this? Which really is just a normal part of processing through what's going on in your life. And
Hmm.
so, here you are now, you know, years beyond all of those surgeries. And are you seeing more in your own life of the kind of the answer, and maybe not the answer, but maybe more understanding of why you went through all of those surgeries and the pain and everything else you went through as a teenager?
For sure. Um, I really can't even quantify the ways that I've, been able to use it to relate to other people. Like whether it's people who have similar like spinal conditions, or people who just had a childhood full of, like surgeries and, whatever, or just hardships. It's something that you can relate to people with, if they are going through something or have gone through something. It's kind of, it's one of those things to where when you share something with somebody, they feel comfortable sharing something too. So honestly, even in my profession, it kind of makes therapy go better.
Yeah. Yeah, I think about what the Apostle Paul said. I think it's in First Corinthians 5, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase this, and that is, our sufferings in this world, or the difficulties that we go through in this world, should really make us people that have a greater sympathy for others that are going through like circumstances.
Hmm.
It's one thing to be able to sympathize with somebody. It's a whole nother aspect when you can really empathize um, uh, with somebody and what they're going through. Um, so my next question, and really one of the reasons why we wanted to have you on, is because your specialty is in working with people on the mental health side, and we know what a huge subject that is in our world today, and it's becoming even more of a talked about subject even within the church, which is good because often mental health comes with a stigma, especially within the church. But what are the early signs of mental breakdown? Because again, going back to what I do, for a living, people often, they seem to be surprised when someone finds himself in a mental health crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And so, one of the things I've tried to learn over the years is what are those early signs that we can start looking for that can say, hey, this person is heading towards a mental health crisis? Or maybe what are those signs that people were seeing and yet they were just very dismissive of those signs as being, hey, this, we need to keep an eye on this, or this needs to be addressed, because if this goes unchecked, then we could end up here. So what are some of
Right.
those early signs that we should be looking for?
Well, I tell people all the time, there's no one size fits all in mental health. There never is. But, when I hear the term mental breakdown, the first thing that comes to mind is, any kind of situation that involves either emotional or psychological distress, pretty much. And I think each person is going to, exhibit like different signs and symptoms of emotional distress or mental distress in different ways. But I mean, things like isolation, severe bouts of depression, um, heightened anxiety, and then especially if it's leading into things like psychotic symptoms, like hallucinations or delusions or, anything along those lines. I mean, that's something that you cannot ignore. I mean, that's a very big thing. But if you're, like observing a loved one, like notice if they're, you know, withdrawing from um, their family and friends, or they're not fulfilling normal daily tasks or their responsibilities at work, or they're missing things, all of those things can be signs of both anxiety or severe depression.
And those are symptoms that we don't need to be dismissive of, right? Because,
For sure.
again, often in talking to people, who are now what I call it critical mass, it's, it's become very evident that something's wrong here.
Hmm.
Their loved ones, their friends, their family, whoever it might be, said, well, we did notice that they weren't doing this anymore, or they
Hmm.
had withdrawn. So, um, can you help us in knowing, because we know that people in those situations are very sensitive, it
Hmm.
seems like, to being approached about, hey, what's going on with you, and we're concerned with you, and you kind of get that snap back, well,
Hmm.
there's nothing wrong with me, I'm not having any issues. So could you give us maybe one or two constructive ways that we could actually approach somebody in those early stages so it doesn't get to critical mass before
Hmm.
it's actually addressed?
Well, I think doing everything in a gentle way is always going to go over better than kind of having that like the intervention style, like conversations you see on TV a lot of times, with like you give somebody an ultimatum, like, hey, either you come with me to this psychiatric hospital or, blah, 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 right? Like those tend to never go well. But, approaching something is, and I was going to, like talk about this later on, but also transparency is a huge thing. When you are talking with somebody, um, a way to get them to, you know, receive it better is to be transparent about yourself, and your struggles too. Like nobody's above, like experiencing mental health concerns, right? So, I mean, just kind of opening that door to be like, hey, you're not alone here. Like we've experienced it too. That can go a long way. But, on the flip side of that, a little more, like an aggressive approach is there's a huge misconception that, people think that if someone is experiencing thoughts of suicide, that it's a bad thing to call it out and ask about it. But it's actually the opposite. Like calling it out and asking somebody, hey, are you feeling like, hurting yourself, or are you having thoughts of ending your life? That actually helps their brain rationalize what they're actually saying. So it actually works as a preventative to somebody following through with those thoughts that they are having them.
Yeah. And do you think also that maybe some of the people that we are, that we may have in our life that we're concerned about, maybe we haven't presented the best, what's this, trying to think of the word I'm trying to think of here, the best side of ourselves as it relates to, mental health. So let me give you a scenario. Maybe this person that we're concerned about has heard us say over the years, or maybe even recently, say very negative comments about people with mental health struggles, or
Mm-hmm.
we're very dismissive of maybe somebody else, that's, having mental health issues.
Mm-hmm.
If we can trace that down in our lives and say, you know what, this person may not listen to me because, you know what, I really haven't been a good proponent of mental well-being. Actually, I've been very critical of people who are exhibiting certain signs of mental distress. Um, do you think it would be good in our approach to that person, maybe to start with, in expressing our concern, also expressing, what we would call an act of repentance towards them
Mm-hmm.
of, hey, look, I've been pretty stupid about this whole mental health situation, and I've made comments that um, are not would not be very pro mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that we need to do, or should we just not even go down that road and just focus in on trying to get the person the help that they need?
I I think that could be, helpful on like an individual basis, depending on the situation. I think your rapport with that person before that conversation is important. Like if it's somebody that you're really, really close to and, they already know a good bit about you, then yeah, I think it's safe to disclose, and say, hey, look, like I'm sorry, like I was a jerk. Like I shouldn't have said these things.
Right.
We all have bias about things in the past, and we've all said things we don't mean. I mean, pretty sure if you talk to me during a football game, I probably don't act the most Christian, right? Like we also say things that are kind of, we wish we could take back. So, I mean, I think if it's like it's difficult as therapists to like knowing how much for us to disclose and how much to withhold with clients, but when it's like a relative or a friend, it's different because you want to disclose on a level that makes them feel you know comfortable sharing things with you.
Yeah. Um, so you said a minute ago, and I have this in my notes, that not all mental health issues are equal.
Hmm.
They're different in a variety of ways. So that leads me to ask this question: does everyone experiencing these signs that we talked about earlier, do they need to seek professional help, or are there just some common sense approaches that can be implemented without seeking professional help?
So that is a question that I get asked a lot, and I'm sure every counselor gets asked that a pretty good bit. But I, the way that I view it is I think we should approach mental health the same way that we approach physical health, in the
Yeah.
sense of if you're going to be proactive about your physical health and you go for checkups, then you should probably do the same for your mental health. Now, am I saying that everybody should be in, weekly or biweekly therapy? No, I'm not saying that, which it can't hurt, but I'm not saying that, right? But I am saying that it doesn't hurt to have a mental health provider that you can check in with, right? That you can be like, hey, I'm experiencing XYZ. Should I be worried about these things, or is this just like, you know, something common? More like, is this like I met with a client recently who I had not talked to in probably a little over a year. And, like I met with him and he was like, hey, I just wanted to ask you, like, do you think these things are seasonal depression, or is that even a real thing? Or is this sign that my, severe depression could be returning? But like, and he was just checking in. And I think that's a really good way to kind of gauge, like, okay, I'm not ignoring it. I'm not just kind of acting like it doesn't exist, but I'm also not kind of overexerting myself into like weekly therapy, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Because I mean, it very well could be. I know my dad, who suffered severe depression back in the middle 90s, who actually so severe that he had electric shock therapy to treat what was going on. You know, thank God he is way beyond that and is doing incredibly well now, almost 20. Wow. I mean, almost 30 years later. So it's,
Wow.
It's been a long time, but I know once he kind of cleared through some of those early hurdles in his treatment, not only with the electric shock, but taking some very high dose psychotics at the same time, along with counseling. One of the aspects of his life that we monitor now is like vitamin D, because he can,
For sure.
if he goes into a funk, which at times happens, the first thing that we do is he'll go to the doctor and he'll get some blood work done. And 9 times out of 10, he's got extremely low vitamin D. And so then he goes on a heavy regimen of vitamin D and boom, he bounces back.
Right.
So I know with him, we've learned over the years that, again, like you said, it's a very complex process. There's so much going on inside the human body that can, trigger these episodes that we really don't need to leave any stone unturned, because it could be very complex, like it was with him initially, or it could be very simple, like it is now with him when it comes to, certain hormones just get out of balance. Then,
Exactly.
once they're addressed, he kind of self-corrects and kind of comes out of that, kind of that malaise that he'll find himself in from time to time.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
So 30 years ago, when I first was exposed to mental health, like I said, with my dad, gosh, I mean, we didn't even talk about mental health in the church. Matter of fact, we didn't talk about mental health outside the church or in anything. And if it was ever talked about, I don't know if you remember this. I'm sure you do. In Tuscaloosa, we used to have a mental hospital called Bryce.
Bryce.
And anybody that was going crazy, we're like, well, you're going to end up in Bryce, man, if you keep acting that way.
Right.
So, I grew up in an environment that was very much anti-mental health and very dismissive of mental health. And so I remember in 1994 when I had to take my dad, I was 21 years old, had to admit him to the hospital in Birmingham to have the electric shock therapy. I just remember feeling this incredible stigma because I thought, man, people are never going to look at my family the same way. They're always going to say, well, hey, there's Jason Grissom and, his dad's over in the psych ward. He had to have this electric shock therapy treatment. And so that stigma was there. It's not near as strong today, but there's still I would say a big majority of our population that sees any kind of treatment for mental health as a stigma. So one of the things I've tried to do over the years is try to help people see that, you know, don't let the stigma stop you from getting what you need.
For
So
sure.
on your side, how would you help people that are listening to this that still carry that stigma with them? How would you help them to say, to overcome that stigma and seek help? And then how would you help the other part of our audience help others who are not getting help because they see any kind of mental health as a stigma?
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting because working with college kids, I've had, I work with some from the US and then some from other countries. And it's always interesting to see the various levels like of stigmatization. Like I'll have some people come in and they might be like, oh yeah, it's very common. My dad had a therapist, mom had a therapist, sister had a therapist, like it's very common. And then I'll have some come in and they're like, yeah, we do not go to therapists in my family.
Right.
We do not, we don't do this. Like we suck it up, we deal with it, and we keep moving. Like that's about it. And it's difficult because having been raised in the rural South, mental health was not a hot topic, growing up. So
Right.
like I can normally relate to people, with that. And again, I think transparency is a huge, huge, huge way to break down stigma because, like I'll meet with many, many people and, like I'll tell them, or like I'll reference my own anxiety or my own experiences with depression. And again, not every two experiences are the same. So you don't ever want to be like, oh, well, when I was, blah, 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 blah. No, but just simply giving somebody the knowledge that, hey, you're not the only one experiencing this and nobody is, immune to it. Not a counselor, not a pastor, not a doctor, not a professional athlete, not anybody. So kind of just reminding them that, hey, give yourself some grace here, because we've all experienced it, is a really good way to kind of like open the door, to make it more comfortable. Not that not that it's ever going to be an easy thing to say to anybody, hey, I'm having mental health struggles. But I think if you can create a space to where it's not it doesn't feel shameful, then people are more likely to do it. Right? Like it's just like you don't have any issue telling your family, oh yeah, I have the flu. Right? You should not have any guilt around saying to your family, oh, I'm very depressed or oh, I have anxiety. But where we are today, it still is very much that way. There's a lot of shame and a lot of guilt around it. And one thing I say to parents a lot when I work with adolescents or with spouses or whoever is you always have to remember that the loved one that you're concerned about did not ask or request to have these mental health symptoms that they're having. Like I don't know anyone who woke up and said, man, I really hope I'm depressed today. Like that's not really a thing that I know about. So when it gets frustrating or when it gets exhausting or when it's hard for them to talk about it, remember they didn't ask for it, but there still is some guilt and shame around it as if it's something that we caused.
Yeah. So let me throw a statement that I hear from time to time from parents, good parents, well-meaning parents. I'm not talking, this is not coming from, malicious, bad parenting. But nonetheless, it's a statement that I hear quite often. And I would like for you to respond to this statement from a counselor's point of view. He's 15 years old. There's no way he has anything in this world to be depressed about.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
How can you help parents not make those kind of statements and not be so dismissive of a 15-year-old who they think has nothing in the world to be depressed about?
9 times out of 10, when I've had parents say that to me, and I'm saying that as having worked in private practice with adolescents for over 5 years. That's, a very common thing. But 9 times out of 10, that is the sheer result of thinking that depression is um, just a mindset, right? Or it's something that they are choosing to partake in. It's it's a it's a lack of education around depression being an actual mental health condition. Um, Now can it be environmentally influenced or socially influenced? Of course, right? Everything can, but you know that would be negating. Like to say somebody has nothing to be depressed about is pretty much negating that it can be a chemical imbalance and a problem in the brain that is not a mindset. So I think it's an education problem, but like I can remember one time when I was living in Nashville, I was doing like a psychoeducation talk at a Catholic school, and one of the kids raised their hands and said something like, "Well, my mom said that I'm only 13 and I can't be stressed. Like 13-year-olds can't experience stress, right?" And I was like, "Okay," and it puts us in a hard topic or like a hard position because we don't want to be like, oh, your parents are wrong. That's like, you don't want to say that, right? But then it's also like, okay, well, whatever her name was, tell me about your day. It's just like, well, I have ballet on Monday and this on Tuesday and violin on Thursday and like all these things, right? And I'm like, yeah, you can definitely be stressed, right? Same thing with depression. Parents have no idea what the kid's going through at school. Parents have no idea the pressure their kid may feel from certain extracurriculars or academic pressure. Even it could be a number of things that the parents just have not been told about.
Yeah. Do you sometimes think that those kind of statements are made um almost as an out for the parent to really have to spend time with their child, helping them to evaluate their life and even develop um, coping mechanisms on, how do you deal with stress? How do you deal with
Mm-hmm.
anxiety or depression? And that's just seems to be an easy statement to get out, to what I would think is getting out of having to really parent your child.
Well, and being a marriage and family therapist, we look at everything very systemically. And, it's a joke amongst all counselors kind of that, if you mention to somebody, hey, we think your child needs therapy, they're like, okay. But the minute you mention family therapy, they're like, nope, not going to do it. Nope, like
Yeah.
we're not going to do that, kind of thing. And I'm not saying that's the case for all parents, of course. There are some parents that I've worked with who are extremely bought into, um, advocating for and kind of, helping with the process of their child's mental health. But a lot of times, yeah, I don't think it's done in a malicious, with any kind of ill intent, but I think it's
Right.
a lack of wanting to acknowledge that their child could be experiencing these things as well. And that's probably something I understand, now more that since I am a parent, is like if my son is experiencing depression, it kind of hits different than if it was just a client of mine experiencing it, right? It's like, okay, well, what am I doing in the home that could be contributing to this, right? What am I doing as a parent that's not helping? What can I do as a parent that could help? And it takes some acknowledgement, on your part as a parent to be like, okay, this is something that I could either be helping with or I could be making it worse. I need to figure out where I stand in that line of things.
Yeah. I know in the past, I've had some students who have expressed, anxiety, uh,
Hmm.
depression, and you start talking to mom and dad about, maybe, well, what's the cause of this? Where's the root of this?
Hmm.
And you start looking at the child's involvement. Well, there's constant sports going on, or there's some constant extracurricular activity that's in play, and then there's a high academic standard, and then there's all these clubs that they may be involved in as well at school, and a lot of this seems to be leading towards, well, this is what's needed in order to score that college scholarship or to get into this particular school. And yet the kid is running. I mean, it's like the adrenaline level is constantly going. And I think sometimes maybe parents see children as this, they have this unlimited amount of energy that they can expend. And the busier that we keep them, then they won't have an opportunity to get depressed or have an opportunity to be anxious because they're sitting around not doing anything. But, Blake, would you say it's possible that even in, a good-hearted parent who is not trying to keep their children so involved in activities because they're trying to be detrimental, there's a mindset there that this is to help my child. Is it possible that, a child that's struggling with some mental health issues, it could be triggered by, you've got too much going on. You need to back off or slow down or cull out some of these activities.
For sure. There's been many times where I've had to meet with parents and be like, okay, what can your child eliminate, right now? Like there's too many things going on. And also just kind of taking the pressure off of certain situations. I mean, if you pressurize any situation too much, it's going to crumble, and I think, like you mentioned, like college acceptance or, whatever it is, that's a huge thing nowadays. I mean, I cannot tell you how many kids I've worked with in the past who they didn't get into this school or they didn't get into this. And, the parents will be like, well, it's because you didn't play this sport or you didn't take this class or you didn't do this, and it's just so much pressure riding on a kid. And I think the parents really negate that these are kids, right? Like this is not a 25 and 26-year-old person. This is a 17 to 19-year-old kid, applying to college or whatever it is. And that can be more than they are equipped to handle in that moment.
Yeah. I always grew up hearing idle hands are the devil's workshop. And, you almost think parents keep their children busy, like I said, to keep them out of trouble. And the longer that I'm involved in the lives of families, which is, like I said, it's over 3 decades now, I'm becoming more and more convinced that it's actually having just the opposite effect on children, and that kids are ending up with some, real legitimate mental struggles because they simply never have an opportunity just to be still or just to relax or decompress or whatever the terminology we want to use, because they're so wide open. And and I even think as it relates to their faith, Jesus would get away and be by himself because it was important to have silence and solitude. And I look at just humans in general, but especially young people. We don't know how to do that. We don't know how to get away and be quiet because we don't know how to deal with our thoughts. We don't know how to deal with what's going on in our minds. And, talking to some kids who have struggled with insomnia at night, they can't go to sleep because their minds can't shut down because they're always on the go. So anyway, here's a question I really wanted to ask you out of everything that I've written down, and that is, you're dealing with athletes. I've dealt with athletes a lot over the years. Coached basketball, coached football, coached powerlifting, and of course played sports my entire life as well. So there seems to be a fine line between mental toughness and mental trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So as someone who works with athletes and coaches, how do you help them know where that line is?
Honestly, that is sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
Emails. That is a simple yet complex answer. The simple answer would be psychoeducation, which um, that term is kind of broad, but educating people on mental health is a humongous task, but also the most important task, that you can have. I mean, we do these things, at my job where we try really hard, yes, to provide, like therapy for the student athletes and, performance evaluations or whatever it may be. But we also try to make it a point to get in front of the coaches, get in front of the athletic staff, get in front of the teams, and just provide sheer psychoeducation. I honestly, again, could not quantify the number of athletes I've worked with who, will come in and after, they may come in for just like, I don't know, like a performance evaluation, right? And, three sessions in, they're like, yeah, I actually never realized that I have a pretty traumatic history, or I have a lot of things that I never really dealt with. And I'm not saying that, we're like, I'm very much not that therapist that's like, let's talk about your childhood every time we get into a session. That's just not how I am,
Yeah,
right?
right.
But I will say there's so many times where I'll meet with somebody and, they will tell me these things that they've been experiencing and they'll be like, wait, that can be a sign of depression or of anxiety. And I'm like, yeah, like I cannot tell you how many times that I have met with someone and been like, hey, depression rarely looks like that weepy person you see on TV commercials, right? Like that's normally not what depression looks like. Depression can look like, um, not wanting to get out of bed. It can look like not doing your schoolwork. It can look like procrastination. It can look like, being unorganized. It can be many different things, but we only think of it as like seeing that, crying person in a window on a Zoloft commercial. Like that's what we think of
Right.
depression as being, right? So
Yeah.
it's like, a lot of people will come in, and also when I say like, mental trauma or psychological trauma, it can also be, things like I don't always mean like abuse, right, or something like that. It can also be like not having processed the death of a loved one, or um, not having grieved um, or processed an emotionally abusive relationship, or just like a traumatic relationship, or um, things happening in your childhood that when you get to adulthood, you look back on them and you're like, that kind of was not right, right? But as you kind
Yeah.
of grow up, you just kind of progress through them. But looking back on it, you're like, oh wow, I didn't really realize how not okay that was, until you become an adult. So a lot of times it just ends up like, okay, it is like athletes are taught to be resilient, right? So a lot of times we have to work to find the line between like, all right, this is being resilient, and then this is just pure neglect of your mental health care, right? So it's finding that balance of like, okay, I can still be mentally resilient and, um, recover from any kind of mental health, struggles I might have, or, be proactive and caring for them. But I can also not ignore the symptoms that I'm having. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. So let's say if there's a coach that's that listens to this podcast and they have concerns as to their approach to trying to create a mentally tough athlete without crossing that line and becoming one of those coaches who really inflicts trauma into
Mm-hmm.
their athlete's life. What what could you advise them to do to better themselves in a way that helps them not to cross that line? Is it as simple as maybe that coach needs to seek out counseling for themselves? Maybe is there a book that you would say, hey, I think every coach ought to read said book because it would help them to better determine, am I crossing that line, or what does it look like to cross that line? Because I think sometimes, I know when I was in coaching, I was around all different kinds of coaches. And I think sometimes, coaches don't even know where that line might be. It's just,
For sure.
One, they don't know they've crossed it. And number two, they don't even know they're even close to it. So, any help there that you might give a coach at any level, whether it be, youth league, because some of the worst ones that I've seen that are traumatized children are not high school coaches. I mean, they're little league coaches.
Yep.
So, any help there that you might could give?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I have this conversation a good bit, and to give a shout out to the University of Memphis. We are very, very, very lucky, or blessed, I should say, in the sense that our coaches across the board have been so pro mental health since our department was started. They have no issue coming to us and being like, hey, how do I handle this? Or how do I talk to this person? Or, am I doing this wrong? Am I doing this right? And I think that takes a special kind of coach, because it's very, you have to humble yourself and be like, hey, is my approach making this worse? Is my approach going to make this, is this a me problem, or is this a student athlete problem, kind of thing. But I think going back to youth sports, I don't want this to sound cliche at all, but, and I'm sure this as being a pastor and having been my youth pastor, I know this relationship and knowing your athletes, knowing the person is so, so, so crucial. So, like, to give you an example, if you are a youth coach and you know the kids on an individual basis, right, you're probably gonna at some point through relationship find out that this kid may have a history of anxiety, right? Or this kid may have ADHD. Maybe a parent discloses it to you, maybe the kid told you, whatever it is, right? Well, knowing that knowledge, and this is a purely hypothetical, right? But that kid is going, take the kid with anxiety, right? That kid is going to receive feedback entirely different from a kid that does not have anxiety. Whereas, like, you may tell a kid in a very, non traumatizing or judgmental tone, hey, do this differently next time. That kid with anxiety may have heard, you did that horribly and you're a failure. Because what anxiety does is you receive it differently, right? So, like, you have to be very mindful of the way you're talking to certain people. So if I'm talking to an athlete that I know from whatever, context has a pre-existing, history of anxiety, I'm going to approach topics a little differently than someone who does not.
Yeah. Gotcha. What are some daily, we're going to wind it down here with a couple of kind of rapid fire questions, but
Sure.
What are some daily practices that can be implemented to promote mental well-being?
So I say this, and I'm probably the worst at doing this. Consistency in sleep is a huge one. I tell people a lot, I don't really care if you get, 7 hours or 5 hours, but it needs to be consistent. That's a big thing because your brain really thrives off of consistency, and also this is another one that I've struggled with in my life is boundaries, but not in the cliche way with, other people, but also boundaries and saying no to people and saying no to things and knowing your limit. That's a huge thing. That people pleaser mentality is very common with anxiety. And that can be one of the most psychologically and emotionally draining things that somebody can do because it never gives you a time to, as you said earlier, be still and rest.
I recently read a scientific research paper on the brain that neurologists have come out and said that the part of the brain that deals with anxiety and the part of the brain that expresses gratitude cannot function simultaneously. And so one of the things that I've been stressing to people in my church, and we even put together a little journal that people can do in the morning and in the evening. This takes about 5 minutes in the morning and 5 minutes in the evening. And part of that is to write down what you're grateful for, as a way to try to, again, if this, study in neurology is correct, if you cannot be anxious and yet grateful at the same time because of the way the brain is structured, then being grateful could be a way to shut down that part of the brain that's being anxious by being grateful for what you have. So do you give any kind of credence to something like journaling or writing down what you're grateful for? Does any of that really have any kind of positive psychological effect for our mental health?
Absolutely. Writing things down, especially, and if you think about it, um, you know, sensory is a big part of our cognitive, functioning, right? So
Mhm.
a lot of times, even with, take anxiety, a lot of times, even just as I call it, extracting the thoughts from your head, putting them onto paper, you're seeing them as part of that sensory, right? It helps you rationalize what is irrational and what is okay to actually be anxious about, right? Like you can actually see it and your brain's like, okay, yeah, that can be eliminated. Like, that can go. But then like, it helps you actually build a defense against the anxious thoughts. Um, Same thing with gratitude. Like I've worked with people before who, moved to a different place and they hate that place. And I'll challenge them to, go through the week and make a note of everything that I actually like about the new place, and it kind of helps the brain um, focus on the positives versus just ruminating on the cycle of what I hate, and I tell people it's a pretty good bit is, rumination or like hyper focusing on the negative is basically just asking, why is this happening to me? But it's not asking, how can I recover from it? So it's the why versus the how. And that is so, so important.
I was just asked this question this week. It's not on my question list, but it just came to my mind, and that is, it came from I don't know if it was from a church member or not, but anyway, it was from someone who is a believer, and they have come to the place where they realize that they need to seek counseling. And
Mhm.
so their question to me is, where do I go? And so because I think with this person, there's a little bit of concern as to, I'm a believer, I have my faith, and yet how do I go seek professional help in a way that the professional that I'm seeking may not, try to uh, maybe dismantle my faith or be
Mhm.
dismissive of my faith. Um, can and can you give people any kind of help of, if they're coming from a faith perspective, what's the
Mhm.
best way to go about looking for a counselor that can both approach it from a spiritual aspect and yet
Mhm.
also approach it from the purely psychological and physiological?
So there's we could probably do an entire podcast just on that question alone.
Yeah,
But so there is, there are a group of or a sector of Christian counseling, I will say, air quote, that, rejects all psychological um, science, right? And then
sure.
there are what I would consider like counselors who are Christians, right? That's what I consider myself, right?
Yeah.
That, you know, take into context both, right? And so I would say there's not a right or wrong way to seek out and locate somebody, but one of the most popular ways is a website called Psychology Today, and is pretty much a search engine that you can filter anything
Okay.
um, when you're looking for a therapist. So, like, if I was, looking for it or looking for one, I would go in and I can put in like I want a male who is a Christian. I can even filter it between like Catholic, Protestant, whatever it is, insurance type, whatever it is, and it kind of
Okay.
gives you a an easier task than just being like, here's 40,000 therapists in Birmingham or
Yeah.
40,000 therapists, in Memphis or wherever it is, because that can be very, very daunting, and I think that it's important to always, have that first like 15-minute conversation with the therapist, because usually you can you can decipher if it's going to be a good, match at that point.
Gotcha. So psychology today is
Mhm.
.com. That's the website. Okay.
Mhm.
Well, we'll definitely put that in show notes for those of you guys that are watching it. Um, Blake, are you doing any private practice? Do you see any patients
Mhm.
on the side?
I do. I have a virtual private practice
Okay.
where I still work with a small number of people in Tennessee on the side.
Okay. Cool. Okay. So now some of the fun questions to wrap it up. Do you have we call these our go-to questions. So do you have a go-to song during difficult times?
I do. It would be "Keep Your Eyes Open" by Need to Breathe.
Okay. Keep your eyes open by Need to Breathe. Do you have
Mhm.
a go-to book during difficult times outside of the Bible?
I wish I could say there was one singular book, but because I have to read so much
Yeah, right.
for academic purposes and whatever else, there's not one singular one. But most recently, I'm reading "Gentle and Lowly" by Dane Ortland, and that's been incredible.
In- Incredible book. Incredible.
It definitely
Our
is
church went through that about 2 years ago, or right as it came out, right after it came out. Yeah, great book.
wonderful.
Do you have a go-to person during difficult times?
Um, I would say I have go-to people.
Okay.
Um, both my siblings and my parents. That's they probably get very much annoyed with me ranting about things to them, right? But also, as I'm sure any other counselor would tell you, it's also nice to have another counselor to go to. So two of my best friends are also therapists, so I go to them a good bit with things.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, does a therapist have a therapist?
Absolutely. If not, they
Yeah.
should.
Yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
get asked that question about being a pastor, and I'm like, well, if they're a smart pastor, every pastor has their pastor, you
Right.
know. So
Right. For sure.
then do you have a go-to place in difficult times?
I used to. As you know, I moved here from the Gulf Coast, so my go-to place was either the bay or the ocean or anywhere like that. Well, living in Memphis, I can't really do that. But before here, when I was in Nashville, I like my coping skills, so to speak, was I would just go and try to find like cool views of the city. I've kind of done the same thing in Memphis, so I'll just try to find like new views of the skyline or like whatever it is.
Okay. And then do you have a go-to passage in the Bible during difficult times?
I do. It's mainly the one that I go to remind myself why I'm in the profession that I'm in. And you kind of alluded to it earlier, I believe, but it's Second Corinthians 1:3-4, and it's the God of all comfort.
Yeah.
It's actually the verse that the American Association of Christian Counselors use. And it talks about, how God comforts us so that we can comfort others. And to me, that's like a very good reminder as to why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm doing this not for myself or not for any kind of platform or whatever, but I'm like going back to my childhood surgeries, right? Like I'm using that same comfort that I felt, from God and trying to mold my um, clinical practice into sharing that with others.
Yeah. Yeah. So I stand corrected on my earlier comment. I think I said 2 Corinthians 5, and I think that's more about salvation. But yeah, Second Corinthians chapter 1. We are comforted to comfort others. All right. Your dad, I talked to him before I interviewed you, and I said, what do you want me to say to Blake? And so this is what your dad says. All right. This not on me. It's on him, but I thought it was pretty cool because, I told him that I said, Blake and I share something in common that I didn't know we shared in common. And that is, I am full of useless information. Like I can tell you that 1 out of every 5 miles of Interstate 20 is completely straight, and it's completely straight by law because of so that we could land airplanes on the interstate in case of war.
Wow.
Most people don't know that. That's one piece of useless information. But your dad tells me
cool.
that you are full of useless sports information. And so give us a useless piece of sports information to close out our interview.
Ooh, gosh.
I'm going to tell you what your dad, while you think about it, what he told me to get you to do. And that is he told me to come up with some random schools and say, name their mascot. And he said, I'm pretty sure Blake could name the mascot of that school.
That's pretty valid. I probably could. Yeah. Gosh, I'm trying to think of one. Being put on the spot is kind of difficult.
I know. I shouldn't have done it to you.
No, it's all good. It's all good. I cannot think of one right on the spot.
I was thinking as much
maybe
Vandy
that.
baseball. Go ahead.
I was going to say maybe a lot of people don't realize that like where I went to undergrad South, they didn't start football till 09. And that's people don't really, they're like, oh, they've always been around. Like, no, they have not. I mean, when I was like a freshman there, football, was like the inaugural season. And, they had a hard time getting fans to the games. They still played at the stadium downtown, and now they have a stadium on campus. It's entirely different.
Yeah, they played in maybe one of the worst venues, Lad People Stadium. I don't even know why it's still standing. It's it's not a great place to go watch a football game. So, but you have seen a lot of great baseball games because I know you're a big Vandy fan, and
for sure,
Vandy has kind of dominated the SEC and college baseball for a few years now. So, they call themselves the Vandy Boys, right?
Yeah, my dad and I went to Omaha a few years ago. We got to watch us lose to Mississippi State. That was never fun, but it was still a great trip to Omaha. It was a really cool experience.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm gonna end our podcast with this. You heard Blake and I talk earlier about some of the childhood difficulties he grew up with having major spinal surgeries throughout his childhood. The one thing I remember about Blake is he loved basketball and loved to play basketball. And I don't know this for sure, but probably had some aspirations maybe one day of, playing beyond high school, maybe small college or whatever. But of course, with everything that he's been through, that was never able to materialize for him. And I remember when he was younger, him having a desire to be involved in sports in his adult life. And just to show you how God takes even the bad stuff in our life and works them in ways that those situations in ways that we can't imagine. I look at Blake now, and he is in college athletics in a very big and prominent way, and he's at one of the best basketball schools in the country, and he's getting to work side by side with one of the 50 greatest NBA players of all time, and Penny Hardaway, if you're not familiar with basketball. And so, Blake, I just look at that, and I look at all the difficulties you've been through, and maybe some of the aspirations that you had personally in your life that, because of what you went through, seemed to have sidetracked or maybe was going to keep you from that. And I'm just amazed at how God has taken that and used every bit of that to shape you and mold you and to get you to where you are today. And so, as we often try to do with this podcast, is to help people see that no matter how difficult life is that God has a plan, and he's working in 10,000 ways that we can't even imagine, and will ultimately put us in a place that is really, as his people, are really far beyond anything that we could have dared to ask or dream of. And so, so excited to see where you are and what you're doing and how the Lord is using you, where he's using you. And just wanted you to know what an encouragement it is to my faith to see your faith being lived out and seeing the Lord's hand in your life. And it's my prayer for you that the Lord just continues to use you in great ways. I wish we had a couple of hours to talk, because I know there's parts of what we talked about we could go into even greater depth. You're a dad of an adopted son, and so we could get into that aspect of our lives, and maybe all of that's good for another podcast down the road at some other time. But we definitely appreciate your time, and I have no doubt that what you shared with us today will definitely help those that are listening. And that's the whole reason why we put this podcast together, is to help individuals to find help, as the Bible says, in their time of need. And so we appreciate you sharing your wisdom. And we're going to put your contact, your Instagram and all of that, where people can catch up with you, follow you, maybe even reach out and make contact with you if they so desire, in the days ahead. And again, thank you so much, brother, for giving us this part of your time this morning.
Awesome. Thank you. It was an honor.
All right. Thank you, brother. We'll see you soon.
Hello, Pancake Pals. It is me, your favorite tech guy, the behind-the-scenes king, David. And I'm here again to give you yet another interesting pancake fact. Okay, so this fact today is about the biggest pancake in the world. Okay, the biggest pancake in the world weighed 6,614 pounds. It was over 49 feet in diameter. I don't know how fluffy it was. I don't know anything about that, but I assume a 49-foot pancake weighing over 6,000 pounds, pretty fluffy. I also wonder if they happen to have a team that was poised. Is that the right word? Poised? I don't know. This is why Jason does most of the talking. To eat it afterwards. I wonder if that was like a part of it. They had to eat it and had to complete it. I know they could have called me. I love breakfast food. I love pancakes in general, and I could just eat all the pancakes that you hand me. Don't test me on that, though, because I might get sick. But I wanted to thank you guys again so much for being a part of our podcast and for joining in and being a part of the Pancake Pals. It means the world to us. It absolutely means the world to us. And we want to thank you for subscribing, for liking, for sharing, for turning on the notifications on YouTube. If you haven't done that, go ahead and click that bell icon and turn on the notifications. That just helps out the algorithm, helps us become a little bit more visible to those around you and those who are checking stuff out on YouTube. One thing that I think we're pretty excited about here, and I wanted to share it with you guys, we're pretty excited about the fact that we have some merch now. We've got merch on our store. We've got some here with us. These are notebooks, hardcover notebooks. They are good for journals. They're just blank pages, but it's got our logo on it. Pretty excited about that. We've also got some really cool stickers. You can stick these things on your car. I'm pretty sure they're weatherproof and everything like that. You can stick them on your car, stick them wherever you want to put them. We've got some little tiny ones too that can go wherever as well. But then one of the coolest things that we have is these glasses. Yeah, they're actually glass, guys. And it has our logo on the front, but it also on the back has the quote from Charles Spurgeon that actually is what kind of inspired the name of our podcast. And it's just, there are difficulties in everything except eating pancakes. I know you hear Jason say that all the time, but now if you order one of these glasses, buy one of these from us, not only will you go to supporting a good cause here, but also you get a really cool mug, and then you'll get to see this quote every single day, or however often you drink out of this thing. I don't know. I've got mine at home, and I've been drinking out of it pretty consistently because I love what we do here, and I support it. So I hope you guys do the same thing. We have links to our merch store in our bio, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's just on a podcast format like Spreaker or wherever you're listening to us. We will have the link to our merch store there, and you can check it out. We've got plenty more. That's not all we have. We have plenty of other things that you can check out and purchase from us. But again, I want to say thank you. Hope you stick around for the 2 times a month that we'll be posting new episodes. We're going to try to get these as consistent as we can. We've got some great shows lined up. We have good stories. We've got advice. We just have good times all around. So if you want to be a part of that, come back next episode, and we'll see you guys later. Thanks for being a Pancake Pal.